Hello everyone, this is Bill with Young Crafts for Lefties. Today we're going to be going over how to do Intarsia color work English style. As you can see here, we have a piece of fabric that has sections of color that are worked in their own little area. We're actually working with 3 colors in a single row, and generally when you are working something with more than 2 colors, you'll generally find that it's Intarsia that you're in. Intarsia looks great, it can seem complicated, but the truth of the matter is it's very, very simple. What I've gone ahead and done is prepared myself some center pull bobbins for the colors that I need, and I'm only going to be using one actual ball of yarn, so that way I can, if I were to continue on with finishing the border, I can have it coming off of a larger piece. But you can do it with small bobbins like this if you want. So to get started, I'm just going to pull some yarn out of my bobbin, and I will go ahead and simply knit until the place where I want to join in my first color. So for me right here, it's going to be about 5 stitches in. There we go. 1, 2, whoops. So I've now reached the point where I'm going to want to join in my next color. I find the easiest thing to do before I join the color in is to simply put my needle through. That way I don't have to worry about where I'm going. So now I'm going to get my next bobbin, give myself a little length of yarn to go, and I will take the purple and I'm going to bring it under the old yarn that I was working with. Now that I've done that, I'm going to just hold on to this tail so that way it doesn't run away on me. And now I begin wrapping my yarn the way I normally would to do my knitting. This first stitch can be a little challenging sometimes, especially if you're not a true English knitter like me. Alright, now I got the first stitch anchored in. Once I do the second stitch, that stitch is going to stay in place. So I'll put my yarn through. I'm going to grab that tail. I will wrap, draw this through. And now I don't have to worry about my tail coming undone at this point, and I can knit to the end of where my purple section is. So now I've reached the point where I'm ready to join in my next color. I'm just going to put the tip of my needle in so I have my place held. I will get my black bobbin, and again, just like we did with the gray, I will take my tail and I will put it under the purple. Now at this point, I will wrap my yarn, draw it through, make sure I'm holding my tail so it doesn't come undone. There we go, I have 2 in now. I don't have to worry about it letting go. I can work to the end of my black section. Now I'm ready to join in my next color, which is going to be the gray. So once more, I put the gray under the black yarn, wrap it, draw it through, and now I can finish out my row. Once we finish out the row, we're going to take a second and we are going to sort out the spaghetti of strings that we have. So that way we know what's going with what and where we're working. So now I finish this row, and as you can see, we have gray, purple, black, and gray again. And hopefully you won't drop a stitch like I just did. But if you do, no big deal, just pick it up. We'll work it, and all is right. So now let's turn this around, and I'm going to hold this up, and you can see my bobbins are dangling, which this actually makes it much easier to straighten things out as we need to. So now I have my gray, which is a working yarn. I have my gray tail, which is going to this stitch right here. I have my black bobbin, which is for this row. That is an old tail. I don't need to worry about it. Here is the tail for the black, which is that stitch. My purple, which is here. My purple tail, which is here. And my gray, which is there. Now, the part that you need to make sure that we're doing here is, as you can see, there are gaps that are happening at each color change point. We are going to close those gaps up. And by doing so, we will take our yarns and we're going to bring them over the gap when we get to them in the purl section. Now, this is our first row where we've joined in the colors, so we will be moving both our working yarn and the tail over that gap. Once we've done this first row, from here on out, we'll only be worrying about moving the working yarn over the gap. So to do this, I'm going to start everything just like we normally would, and I will go ahead and purl my first stitch, and I'm going to work all of my stitches until I have made it to that first gap. And I pardon for the awkwardness here. English is definitely not my strongest way of knitting. Now, I've made it to the point where the tail is, so I'm going to take that tail and I'm going to hold it so that way I don't have to worry about my working loop getting too loose. Once I've done that, I'm just going to give it a little tug to bring it to tension. And now I'm ready to cross a gap. I will put my needle in the first stitch. I'm going to take both the tail and the working yarn and I'm going to drape them over to the side. Notice how I'm draping it across the length of the needle and I'm making sure that it's spanning the gap. Now I find my working yarn, which is attached to the bobbin. And when I take that working yarn and I am ready, see how these two gray yarns are trapped or tacked down under the black? Now when I do that, that gap that we had is gone. I can take both of those and drop them down. I don't need to worry about them any longer. And I continue working. Now I've made it to the black tail. So again, I'm just going to grab that so that way I don't have to worry about accidentally pulling my loop undone. Once I drop that off, I'll give it a little tug for it to get to tension. I grab the tail and the working yarn. I will drop them going across from left to right. I find my purple working yarn. See how when I lift it, the black is behind it? That's how we want it to be. So now we go ahead, bring that through. Now I'm just going to pull that one to tension, pull these to tension, and when we flip this around, you will see that all of those gaps that we had are now closed. I was able to drop the black yarn back to the front of the work at this point, because I no longer need to worry about having them tacked down because they are tacked. So here again, I've made it to the first purple stitch, which I want to just grab and hold so that way I don't have to worry about having it pop out or that loop getting too big. Now that I've done that again, we can see we have the big loop. I just pull the tail to close it down and bring it to tension. Now we're at another gap. I'll just put my needle through and see how the needle points in that direction. That's the direction we want to take those yarns and move them to. Now that they're across the gap, when I pick up my gray working yarn, you can see that when I lift it, the purple is behind it. So now I will go ahead work that stitch through, pull that to tension, pull these to tension, and again we're not death gripping them, we're just making sure that we're shrinking the loops back up to a more normal size and bringing the edges flush to each other. Now that we've gotten to the end of this row, go ahead and turn this around and take a look. So here we can see that big gap that we had before is now gone and it's moved to the upper row above. So here I will show you how to close the gaps on the knit side, and you will be ready and able to do your Intarsia. Okay, I've now made it to here, and my working has opened that up. You can see that. I'm just going to take those two purple strands, pull them, and now I've closed up the gap. At this point, we no longer need to worry about the tails. We just need two things. The old yarn that we're done with and the new yarn that we're going to. I'm going to take my needle and I will put it through the stitch. See how the needle points to the right? You always want to take that working yarn and put it in the same direction. I'm crossing in the back from left to right with the old working yarn. So now when I pick up my purple yarn, it will, when I make my stitch, go over the old yarn and tack it down. So again, I'll just wrap, bring it through. I'll pull the gray a little bit to close up the gap. And here I can continue working. As you can see now, we're getting some speed going because we're no longer having to worry about having a stitch come undone, where's it going to run to, none of that. I finish that, I'll put my tip in. My tip points to the right. I take the old yarn and I bring it to the right, and I like to just let it drape over the front. That way I know that it's arcing in the way that I need to. I will find my black bobbin, This is where it's much easier if you have a small bobbin, because if things are tangled, it's a lot easier to untangle it. So here I will go ahead, knit this first stitch. When I drop it off, I can pull it to tension, and that purple is tacked under the black in the back. At this point, I don't need to worry about the purple. I can simply drop it and let it go. So we go and we knit, finish out this row. And here I split my yarn, so I'm just going to pick that up and fix it. There we go. So now I've finished another section. Put my needle in. It's pointing to the right. I take the old yarn and I drape it to the right. I pick up the new working yarn that I need and I wrap and I knit my stitch. At this point, once you've done the first stitch, you can take your old yarn and drop it to the back. Now, once I finish a row, I like to go through, find all my tails, and just give them a little tug so I can tighten up those spaces. And there we go. We have done another row. The gap on the bottom is closed, and it is moved to the next row at the top. Once you're done and you're ready to go back to just one color in the section, you simply knit across everything. You don't have to worry so much about tacking down one yarn over the other, because you will be working a solid row across, and that's going to close up any gap that you'd have. So that's all there is to how to do Intarsia English style. Thank you so much for bearing with me through my awkwardness knitting English. I hope you found this video helpful. This is Bill. Happy knitting.